I could imagine a time in the future where robots are so sophisticated and AI is so sophisticated that we literally don't know whether or not they are conscious or sentient like us. But it's a matter of like, what's that threshold to get fully across the uncanny valley? We can completely make sure that, you're going to stay, that your body's going to stay at age 24 for the rest of existence. Your communication skills actually really drastically increase your earning potential. Like, the school system is a pipeline of producing compliant factory workers. American schools in particular are really good at educating curiosity out of children.
I mean, special was just kind of a nice way of putting that something is wrong with you.
I was always like the dork, or my nickname in middle school was actually literally smart kid. We're actually a superpower. I mean that I built a 6-figure career with no education. A happy life mostly comes from the quantity and quality of relationships that you have.
MINDBLOWERS, the mysteries of tomorrow. This episode, Post-Labor Economics with David Shapiro and Daniel Kafer.
I know quite a lot of people with young kids, and they always ask me, how should we educate our kids? One thing I see developing so slowly is the school system. I don't know if it's any different in the US, yeah?
Antiquated, yes.
Antiquated, yes. They still have a grade for handwriting. I think you mentioned something about communication being key, a key skill in the future.
Yeah. So my wife and I talk about this a lot because we do want to have children once we're a little bit more, financially stable and figure out where we're going to be in the long term. And just again, looking at everything that I think is happening and what's coming and what we believe about the education system, we have already decided that we will not be going to, we're going to basically do homeschooling. So here's what I would focus on as an aspiring parent in the face of artificial intelligence and everything. Number one is relationships and communication. A happy life mostly comes from the quantity and quality of relationships that you have. So that means, expressing yourself, telling stories, active listening, negotiation, setting boundaries, working through conflicts. That, I'm not going to say that that's like the only thing to teach, but that is one of the most important things that children should learn. Because also, and this is true in my career, and I'm curious if it was true in your career as well, your communication skills actually really drastically increase your earning potential. Whatever happens in the future, again, whether you're an influencer or a communicator or a singer or a movie star, there's all kinds of things where the ability to express yourself and form good, trusting relationships, whether they're friendly relationships or professional relationships, that is the most single valuable skill set that exists today, and I think it's going to continue to exist into the future. Other things that we would focus on is learning how to be in life. And what I mean is, here's an example. Schools in America start really early. And so what this does is, and the reason that this is one of the most grotesque things to me, the reason that schools use alarm bells to train children to shift from one task to another is because it's based on how factories used to work. When you work until the factory bell tells you you're done. You get in, and if you're late, when the factory says, time to start at 9 o'clock or 8 o'clock, then you get punished. And so the school system is a pipeline of producing compliant factory workers, which I think is completely bogus. And that's what I meant when I said it's antiquated. Not only is it antiquated, it's draconian, and it prioritizes economic productivity and docility over all else. So that's why it's we're not going to the public school system, period, end of story. We're going to teach how to take care of yourself, diet, exercise, good relationships, following natural interests. American schools in particular are really good at educating curiosity out of children. This is why, despite being gifted and bright and highly curious, I hated school because you don't actually reward curiosity in American schools. I don't know how it is in other schools. It's we don't care what you actually care about. We want you to overcome your natural inclinations and focus on only what we want to teach you. And oh, by the way, you also have to only go at the pace that the school tells you to. You're not allowed to go at your own pace. So I could talk about the flaws in modern education theory for a long time. But yeah, I would start with self-care, communication, and relationships, far and away the most important set of skills for living happy and healthy in the future.
Yeah, I think very little has happened in Europe. I went back after 25 years after finishing high school, and I had a look at the books. And you know what? I have found one of my own books where, you write your name in the book and it's being passed on, right? And it was 5 years old when I had it 25 years ago. So this poor student will have a 30-year-old book. I was just like, well, quite a lot of stuff happened between then and now.
Right.
Yeah, so I think it's a bit of a catastrophe, really. One of the reasons I have my children in school is more for the social interaction, really. I think that's beneficial, and I don't know quite how to replace that yet.
I mean, there's plenty of homeschool groups where it's groups of families and parents that have also decided not to do conventional education, and so then the homeschool groups do a lot of the same things. They do field trips, they do school plays, they do all sorts of stuff. So those institutions are there, and if more people opt out of traditional education, and instead then there will be more demand for homeschool groups. So where there's a will, there's a way. There's always an opportunity.
Okay, well that's interesting to hear. Probably that's a little more normal in the States. I think, for example, here in Cyprus, where I live now, it's simply not legal. The police will come and pick up your kids if you try and do anything like that. So there's a little bit of development.
Yeah, I mean, but that also goes back to the authoritarian take where corporations dictate that to the nation. And so now the nation of Cyprus, I don't know if that's true, but if the nation of Cyprus says you are legally required to put your child in the school to corporation pipeline, that is so draconian. If I had children, I would leave Cyprus.
So far, they're fine. I think they're learning a lot of social skills. So that part is fine. But I mean, Europe might be known for good education. I think should be known for free education, but mediocre education. So I hope there will be more alternatives. I wanted to talk about kind of successful personalities in the future. So my take is kind of when I was growing up in kind of the late 70s and early 80s, I can remember one of the worst things to be called would be to be different or even special. I mean, special was just kind of a nice way of putting that something is wrong with you. I kind of have that feeling that is changing. At least if somebody said, you're nice, you're very normal, I would be a little bit offended. I would, I guess today, rather be special or different than super normal.
Right.
Do you see that trend as well?
I do see that trend. We're in a generational stage where divergence is happening again. So kind of the last time that it happened was kind of in the 60s with, the hippie movement and the beatniks and the countercultural revolution. So it's, 60 years. It's high time for another cultural revolution. And it's being driven, in part by initiatives like diversity and inclusion. But I think it's also largely just being driven by the internet, and people are realizing that characteristics that have been pathologized are actually strengths. And here's a personal story. I was always like the dork, or my nickname in middle school was actually literally smart kid, because I was just insanely curious. And so in photography class, I knew that the original way that you took photo was cesium plates, and not even the teacher knew that. And so that's an example of where it's just okay, that would be considered eccentric, so because of the way that American schools are, because of my own stubbornness, and my parents also they did not want to control me. So I have a very, very long rebellious streak. And so I never really learned to conform. And then once I got into the workforce, all the things that I had been teased for and bullied by, and all the character traits that made me not good in school, which I got decent enough grades, were actually a superpower. And I don't just mean they were now helpful. I mean that I built a 6-figure career with no education. And then I built a 100,000 follower YouTube channel. Again, just by using my own natural abilities. So part of that is being driven by kind of this divergence in society, where as society broadens, there's more opportunities. Then there's also, because of the internet, there's more opportunities for people to find each other and form new tribes. Whereas before, if you had a personality trait or a set of capabilities that was 1 in 1,000 or 1 in 10,000 or whatever, then chances are you might never meet anyone like you. If you have abilities that are that rare, or personality traits that are that rare, you might meet only 1 or 2 people like you in your entire life. But now with the internet, it's like, wow, there's thousands of us. There's tens of thousands of us. It's much easier to build a tribe. And going back to the fact that we are a social animal, we form those tribes. And so then once you have a tribe, you say, actually, there's nothing wrong with me. I'm normal within the context of this tribe. And not only am I normal, it's not pathological. And so what I mean by pathological is when you have a normalization, when you have social norms that say this is acceptable and good, this is unacceptable and bad, but then you get into a different social context where it's like, actually, all of these traits that have been, ostracized or pathologized, not only are they natural, they're positive. And so then you completely flip the script around. And what I've kind of noticed is that it almost seems like there's this mosaic pattern of society where it's like you've got tribes of people that are, like X, Y, and Z, and tribes of people that have, characteristics A, B, and C. And we can all find each other, and we don't have to bother each other anymore either. You kind of end up in your own bubble, your own echo chamber. And I don't think echo chambers are a bad thing, to be honest, because you say, these are the values that we have. Not only are these the values, but these are the character traits that we valorize within this tribe. And that allows people to have their spaces. Whether it's like LGBTQ, whether it's neurospicy, whether it is, jocks, right? People do CrossFit. CrossFit is a tribe. I don't know if you have CrossFit in Europe, but it's like a physical competition. And so you're allowed to have people do whatever that it is that they want. And I think that will continue. And I think that it'll actually accelerate because if people start to lose jobs, a lot of people are going to have a lot more time to find their tribe and build their tribe. But then I think also, based on some of the startups that I talked to, I think that there's going to be some technologies coming and startups that actually help you find your tribe and help you build your tribe. And I think that will probably accelerate that pattern, if I had to guess.
But do you see the world going more and more virtual? I mean, the reason I'm asking the question is because I guess finding your tribe on the internet is a whole lot easier than kind of in the random playground if you're a kid, right? Or at a physical workspace, for example. So is it in that connection you're seeing kind of the tribes forming virtually?
Yeah, certainly it's cyberspace right now. But I will give it a counter example, which is there's a platform called meetup.com. When I don't do it right now just because I prefer I'm a little bit more of a hermit these days. But I created a generative AI meetup. And so it's a platform that's kind of like Facebook, but the entire point is to create social groups that are local. And so then you can create your tribe and you attract people based on, specific interests or specific, age ranges or whatever. And that's actually, so that was like last year that I created the AI meetup. And I met a bunch of people that were in the same space as me. But another story, which is 5 years ago, I joined a science fiction writing group, and that's where I met my now wife. So by pre-selecting for particular interests and particular kinds of interest, you can actually find your tribe pretty easily. So you take tools like Meetup that can get you offline, and then you look at the fact that you're able to find hopefully better cities. So this is one of the things that I alluded to earlier is we sold our house because we were in the wrong city. So one of the things that we did to prepare for the changes is we moved to a town that is better suited to our personality and better suited to our social needs. And so that's another thing that people can do is say, hey, if you're living in a city just because that's where the work is, Well, that's not necessarily going to be optimized for what your children need. That's not going to be optimized for what you need for your sense of accomplishment or your social life or whatever. So yeah, sorry, kind of took that and ran with it, but I hope that helps.
That's definitely cool. So do you think like the opposites attract idea, is that overrated? Are we happier in our tribes?
Yeah. So the statistically speaking, marriages between people who are more similar last longer. So people with the same values, people with similar personality traits, people that are closer in socioeconomic status. So yeah, but what I will say is that I won't say opposites attract. What I will say is complementarity works, and that is like, for instance, I am much more ambitious and assertive and like a go-getter than my wife, and she's more cautious and she's more thoughtful and those sorts of things, and so we work really well. And by the way, this is apparently a very common pattern for writers. We have a friend who's a couple that's almost identical. And then we have another set of friends where the roles are reversed, where the woman is more like me and the husband is much more like low key. So anyways, you can have complementary traits. And so complementary traits are like if someone is more shy and introverted and then the other is more extroverted and friendly or charismatic or whatever. Those often work well together because the power hierarchy, because anytime you have a relationship, there's going to be some kind of power hierarchy. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. But when it's clear and obvious, you know who is stronger on, one thing and who is stronger on another. So here's an example. Because my wife is more thoughtful and thorough and diligent, she's way better at taking courses and like online classes. I'm like, just tell me how to do it and I'll go figure it out. So she learns a different way than I do, but then when we join forces, we can actually compensate for each other's different strengths and weaknesses. But everything else, and it's not saying that you have to be identical to your tribe or to your partner, but we have a lot of values in common, a lot of our politics are very similar, our socioeconomic background is very similar. So having that common ground to stand on really helps glue tribes together. And again, whether it's a marriage or whether it's a friend group or whatever. That's my take.
So I was thinking, if we go maybe 10, 15, 20 years into the future, how much do you think our social interactions might be with AI, even robots? To paint a picture, could you imagine having an AI girlfriend? And when you're going to be together, you might take some form of pill or going into some form of lucid dreaming state and then have like a dream vacation in maybe two hours, but it will feel like 2 weeks. Do you see that for us in the future?
From my own perspective, there was a period of time when I thought that it would be great to have an AI friend. And now that we have that as an option, I don't care anymore, which is that's not what I expected. And in fact, the more that AI takes over things, the more I prefer human interaction. So whether that is like, just as an example, we're getting, I have a giant bookcase behind me. So we're donating books. And so I just texted the neighborhood because we have a neighborhood text. I said, hey, I'm donating a lot of books. Does anyone want any? A neighbor came over and hung out and talked for an hour about books yesterday. And like, that is the kind of interaction that is memorable. It's meaningful. And I think that, at least for me, I know there's plenty of people out there that disagree with this. But at least for me, knowing that the machine does not have the same kind of experience that I do, it just makes it feel empty. It makes it feel completely hollow. And so then once I realize that, I'm like, oh, I'm not waiting around for, an AI girlfriend or AI friends or Android friends or whatever. If it happens, it happens. But really in particular, I hope that, and I think that this is going to be, again, that divergence in society. I think that there will be probably plenty of people who will be more than happy to just put on, VR goggles and have, their virtual friends. They actually explored that in Star Trek many years ago with holodeck addiction. I think it was Lieutenant Barclay was addicted to the holodeck, and he reimagined all of his friends, and they just said like, "You're the best," and those sorts of things. I think that certainly there will be some people who just prefer that kind of fantasy world where they're the hero and everyone likes them no matter what they do, and everyone is friendly because there's no stakes, there's no risks involved in that. I personally have found those kinds of things to be like kind of depressing for me, and that's not to like denigrate anyone else who finds it meaningful. But at the same time, whether or not you can get like, brain computer implants or like in the TV show Westworld where you can't differentiate between humans and robots, I could imagine a time in the future where robots are so sophisticated and AI is so sophisticated that we literally don't know whether or not they are conscious or sentient like us. But that's a little ways off. Yeah. So in the long run, yes, it's entirely possible that like we'll have Android friends. But that's quite a ways off if I had to guess.
But don't you think our minds might be wired to be tricked? I mean, what I'm thinking, for example, is I play computer games sometimes, but it's mostly I'll find something that really fascinates me. Like, for example, I liked Cyberpunk 2077. Yep. And when you play that quite a lot, you do kind of build relationships, kind of, at least. You feel, right? You do get sad when somebody dies that you're friends with, or you're trying to romance somebody and it doesn't work out, and things like that. And I can just imagine if we put that on steroids with AI, it could be very intense.
Oh yeah. I mean, certainly some like, and by the way, Cyberpunk is one of my favorite games of all time. And so yes, like it's a stone's throw to add AI to make the characters more responsive. Because right now, the script was already written; it's fixed. So you play it once, you know what's going to happen if you play it again. So in that respect, it's very, very unrealistic. In another respect, you don't even get to choose what you say. You get 3 or 4 options, but you as a human might want to do something completely different. So yes, AI could make video games much, much more engaging and dynamic and those sorts of things. But at the same time, and yes, in terms of developing, I kind of characterize these as parasocial relationships because that it's really a one-way relationship. The character on screen doesn't actually know who you are. It's just a facsimile. And also as a storyteller, we writers are really good at doing that. Writers make it a point of generating emotions in the audience. And so like video games are just an artistic expression. So the emotions that you're having, like, and this is going to get a little meta, they're not your idea. It wasn't your idea to have those emotions. It was the writers. But what you're doing is you're at a point where you're crossing the uncanny valley where the emotional impact that you're having is real enough that you don't mind. Now, again, that's why I say like there will be plenty of people that would prefer to have virtual friends or robotic friends or those sorts of things. And I do suspect it'll get to a point where like it'll be good enough for me as well. But it's a matter of like what's that threshold to get fully across the uncanny valley.
Do you know if this is being worked on? Like, for example, the sequel to Cyberpunk, that it will have AI NPCs and like more choices, so you kind of feel that it's more real. Do you know if they're working on these steps?
I don't know if they're integrating it into the game engines just yet, but there's certainly mods out there. Like you can have conversations with Skyrim companions, that's the Bethesda Softworks open world game. So whether or not the game studios have embraced that yet, which I'm sure that they will with next gen consoles, the only problem is it's still expensive to run those models. What I'm paying attention to is companies like Liquid Networks or Liquid Neural Networks, which are much smaller models that can even run on your phone. And so once you have models that can run on your phone, they can easily run on like an Xbox or a PlayStation, which could then be used to generate dialogue in real time. So I would expect maybe 1 or 2 more generations into the future, then all of this will be probably fully integrated into video games. So if I had to guess, 2 to 5 years, because that's about the life cycle of a generation of video games.
Yeah, it will certainly be interesting. I tried to research if like GTA 6 would have those kind of capabilities, but it seems like they're focusing on something else. Can we talk about, like, what do you envision the future of, let's say, 2045 to be like? So kind of when we're very near to singularity. I have one specific question that kind of puzzles me. So we always say that development happens so fast, but I always think the human expectations happen, they're faster. It's like when we get GPT-5, people will say, well, that's great, but when do we have GPT-6, right? We always seem to be that one step ahead. Do you think when we get closer to singularity that will change?
I think, so one is we're really good at moving the goalposts on ourselves. We definitely always kind of want the next best thing. Particularly after a period of stagnation. So from, after the internet, kind of we had about 10 years from 2008 or 9, because the internet really changed when Facebook came online, because that's when marketplaces of ideas really came up. So you had Facebook, Twitter, Reddit, a new kind of internet experience, but then it kind of stagnated for about 10 years. The models became, and what I mean by models is the business models became well established. We're now ready for change. Not only are we ready for change in terms of our relationship with electronics, we're ready for change economically speaking, because a lot of people can't afford housing, or a lot of people have student debt, but they don't have good jobs and those sorts of things. So people's appetite for change is really kind of what you're paying attention to. And this happens cyclically throughout history. Usually tension builds up in some form or another, and then something breaks the tension. Now, in the last century or two, technology has actually been what's called a forcing function, meaning that social change could happen. So like the French Revolution and the American Revolution, those were where tension had built up due to political systems. And so then, you do revolution every now and then to force change. But instead, now we have democracy, which allows for incremental political change, so that hopefully you don't end up with, civil wars anymore, because democracy still happens. Obviously, it happened here in America, and people are afraid that it might happen again. I don't think that it will. But now, particularly over the last century, where technology changes so fast that technology is what is reshaping politics and economics and the rest of society, and it forces those changes to happen. And so what you're noticing, where people are like, oh, GPT-4 didn't save the world yet. GPT-5 won't save the world. We need other technologies, and it needs to be implemented. So what I think that you're really noticing is an appetite for change. Once things are good, people don't want anything to change. You look at people who grew up in the 50s and 60s, when, that was, at least here in America, when that was like the last high, where we'd come out of the war. America was by far the most powerful nation on the planet. Economics were good, jobs were good. There was a huge amount of opportunity and hope and optimism. Well, we've been on a 50 or 60 year slow downslide, where things are getting more cynical, less optimistic. People have less hope for the future. And there's fewer opportunities. So that's the zeitgeist that you're noticing, is that, hey, we really want to get to a place where we're hopeful and optimistic about the future, not cynical and pessimistic. And once we get to a place, whether it's through technology, whether it's through political change, economic change, or all of the above, because again, technology forces those changes. Then once we get to a place where people are happy with things, will be like, okay, now I'm not hungry for change. And I see this a lot in my audience, where people are so hungry, they're saying, yes, bring this new technology, shake everything up, because I don't like the way things are right now. I want something to change. And that goes back to at the beginning of the conversation. Change is often a threat or an opportunity, and it often depends on how you approach it.
You say there's a hunger, and that is why people want things to move faster. But do you then think kind of the idea of singularity is where evolution is so fast that, well, I don't even know how to describe it, but Kurzweil says something like, there's a constant change in innovation and you can't keep up, right? Do you believe in that definition of singularity?
Sort of. So this is where people often look at things through their own education and lens. And by the way, Ray Kurzweil, super smart guy, lots of inventions under his belt, clearly knows technology. But on the other hand, what we're talking about is computers. And yes, computers can have many, many downstream effects, but there's also lots of things that they can't really affect. Computers won't be able to impact the climate directly or weather directly. You might be able to model, know exactly what a hurricane is going to do if you have better computers. But then all you can do is get out of the way of the hurricane. That's an example of the limitations of computational power. Another thing is, imagine that, by 2045, we have solved chemistry and genetics and biology. There is nothing that we can't cure. We can completely make sure that, you're going to stay, that your body's going to stay at age 24 for the rest of existence. Like, those are all things that are possible, but there are still going to be things outside of what that influences. There's only, we're not going to change the rotation of the earth with all that. We're not going to overcome fundamental laws of physics. So here's a possibility that one of my friends who's a phenomenal scientist told me years ago. Like, even if you solve every intellectual problem, stuff like faster than light travel just might not be possible. It might always take a few months to get to Mars. It might always take a few centuries to get to the next star. There's going to be plenty of things that just are not solvable, at least not in the way that people hope. And so, yes, you might get to a point where, because computers are so powerful and so fast, they can run a real-time simulation of the entire planet, and you can predict, many things out into the future. But even then, it still takes time for trees to grow. The tides are still going to come. The life cycles will take time. And also, even if you're able to put, implants and stuff in your brain or genetically modify your brain, there's still probably going to be physical limits, because guess what? The laws of physics don't really care what you think or what you know. Physics is its own thing. So while I do think that all computational problems will be solved by 2045, that's still a subset of the total number of problems and experiences that can be that we can talk about. So yes, it'll be a very exciting time, but it will also be, it's not going to be magic. You're not going to just suddenly erase the laws of physics, I don't think.
Well, I think the things you mentioned about, for example, longevity, escape velocity, I think that would be enough for people to go, wow, something has really changed. I remembered listening to Peter Thiel a couple of years back when I was at Meta, and he kind of said, he had the perspective that technological advancement is actually slowing down. What he said is like, well, in terms of bits and computers, yeah, it's accelerating. That's what we call technology and innovation. But in terms of everything else, very little is happening. I would kind of say, if we solve chemistry, if we solve longevity, escape velocity, that would be outside of just kind of innovating bits, right? That would innovate our bodies.
It's possible. The thing is biology is incredibly sophisticated. And I do agree. Science and technology all seems to be following a sigmoid curve, which means there is a point in the curve. So sigmoid means it's shaped like an S. So there is a point in the curve where it looks like it's going to keep accelerating, but then that acceleration slows down and it eventually plateaus. We are not near the ceiling yet in terms of what's possible with computational power, but I do agree that science as a whole, we need those exponential innovations in computer science just to keep the rest of science going at its current pace. And so here's an example. Back in I think it was the 50s when they first started working on nuclear fusion, the first fusion experiment was small enough to fit on a desk. And then they realized, well, this problem's harder to solve. So the fusion experiments got bigger and bigger and more expensive, exponentially so. So very often, some of the frontiers of science that you want to solve require exponentially more time, energy, resources, and brain power. I mean, you look at the expense and the size of the Large Hadron Collider. You look at the size and expense of the James Webb Space Telescope. You look at the size and expense of ITER, the big nuclear experiment in Europe. And so what often happens, and by the way, we see that exponential growth across the board. The cost of new drug discovery is going up exponentially. The amount of science and computation that you need just to keep inventing new drugs is astounding. It's astronomical. So while we do have one, exponential curve, which is Moore's law, that is needed just to keep things going at their current pace. It's kind of like the Red Queen hypothesis from evolution, where you have this kind of coevolution that's happening. Well, yes, quantum computing and artificial intelligence and all those other things, they're going very fast, but even despite that, everything else is still going about the same pace, if not slowing down. So that's another reason why I'm cautious about kind of having inflated expectations about the singularity. Yes, computation will be solved by 2045, but there's still going to be other limitations in the world.
So when you look at having predictions for the future, how consistent do you keep your own predictions? I remember you had a couple of predictions on AGI, and for example, longevity, escape velocity. I mean, is it like you get some new information and then you say, okay, this will take longer, or do you have a fairly consistent view on when these things are happening?
Yeah, I mean, I always, anyone who doesn't update their beliefs when confronted with new or conflicting information is a fool. So yes, whenever I get new valuable information, I update what I think is going to happen. Now, with respect to AGI, I do think that I was actually accurate, because you look at what AI can do today, and it can do computational fluid dynamics. It can, help solve cancer diagnosis. It can help advance medical research. AI can do a lot of things that I can't do. And that's kind of been people's definition, is like, AI is whatever humans can do that it can't. Well, AI has surpassed what I can do in a lot of ways. So that's one way of looking at it. But then in terms of like, okay, well, what do I look at? And I'm actually going to be giving a guest lecture on this, is trust the data, right? We humans do not have the neural machinery to intuitively understand exponentials. Like it's just not the way that this is spoken of is we evolved to think locally and geometrically. But the world is global and exponential. So your intuition, your emotions, your intuition, your basic understanding is not adequate. It is literally beyond anyone's cognitive horizon to intuitively understand what's happening. So I always trust data. Whenever there's good data, I look at what did the numbers tell me. If there's a consistent line on the graph, like you look at Moore's law, for instance, you look at population changes, those are things that you can actually trust when you're thinking on global scale and long-term events. Oh, also speaking of, not only did humans evolve to think locally and geometrically, we evolved to think at most maybe a year into the future, because that is the natural cycle. Because under normal circumstances, you only need to think about surviving the winter, right? You only need to think about, okay, when is summer coming back? We didn't evolve to think any further ahead, because most natural cycles are shorter than that. So anything greater than a year, trust the data. Anything greater than local, trust the data. Anything greater than geometric, trust the data. So that's what I look for. That's how I make my predictions.
And for example, longevity, escape velocity, do you still believe around like mid 30s, early 40s, or where are you on that?
So I've been following regenerative medicine and stem cell therapy research since like 2010. And even back then, of course, I didn't write this down anywhere, so take it with a grain of salt. But even then, I predicted that 2020 was when things were about to change. And already the regenerative medicine industry is a multi-billion-dollar industry. So I was pretty close in terms of just like, okay, when is this actually going to be a thing? If it continues for any length of time, then yes, it's going to be probably sooner than 2035, if I had to guess. It's looking like regenerative medicine will probably really take off before 2030. Now, will that constitute as longevity escape velocity? Longevity escape velocity is kind of the biological equivalent of the singularity. But really what you can do is just look at the data, like how many drugs are in the pipeline, how long does it take for those drugs to be realized, how much investment. So when I was predicting like when solar was going to take over, all you had to do was just look at the investment. Because where investment goes, where investment goes, results follow. And so when you looked at the exponential in the early 2010s, when you looked at the exponential rising investment of solar, that trend continued for 15 years. And guess what? Now solar is so cheap that it's actually cheaper to install more solar than it is to build nuclear. So that's basically a solved problem. So when you notice exponentially increasing investment, it seems like it's an average of 7 to 15 years before that problem is more or less solved. So the fact that we have exponentially rising investment in things like longevity and regenerative medicine, as long as we don't hit a bottleneck, which again, you look at those other examples that I gave, the results will follow. So I'm not too worried about longevity escape velocity being hit before 2035. I think that's one thing that we should expect to see before we reach singularity, whatever that happens to be.
But do you think there's a risk that there's just one problem we can't solve? So, for example, what Aubrey de Grey said is you might have 10 time bombs in your body. Let's say your brain is one of those. So if you can't rejuvenate the brain, but you can rejuvenate everything else, you might still only live to like 100, right? Or do you think it's just an understanding of chemistry? And once you kind of have biology and chemistry solved, you will have longevity escape velocity because you can impact the whole thing.
Yeah, so I've had debates about this with people for many years, and when you take a first principles view of biology, you might say, well, we don't have any a priori evidence of immortal beings, but that's actually not true. There are organisms that do seem to live forever. We don't have any examples of organisms as sophisticated as humans living forever, but at the same time, we do have plenty of evidence of cells and multicellular organisms that are capable of indefinite lifespan, of rejuvenating themselves. And furthermore, we have evidence of human renewal through reproduction, which is like, despite all the damage that your body accumulates over your lifetime, somehow evolution and biology is able to repair all of that and create a brand new life form, through children that are then able to not only compensate for the damage that maybe you have received, they're often more vigorous than you are. That's heterosis. That is the purpose of evolution, is to create offspring that is better than you. So when you look at all the things that biology has already figured out, mostly we just have to find the right combination of buttons to push. There's so many biological levers in terms of proteins and enzymes and RNA and everything, but it's the most complicated puzzle box we've ever come across. Literally, biology is the most sophisticated natural system. The human brain is the most complex object we have ever detected in terms of how sophisticated the human brain is. No computer that we've built comes remotely close. So it'll take us a while to really figure out how everything works under the hood, but there's no magic to it. It's just hydrocarbons, right? Like we know what we're made of. We know how those things work. The biggest constraint right now is simulating it, is modeling it, and in some cases measuring it. But again, IBM can measure things down to the proton level in terms of using some of their more sophisticated tools. We're able to model worm brains and rat brains, and I think Google is actually one of them that's working on modeling the entire human body, or at least the entire human metabolome. All of these things are coming. So with respect to biology, I don't see any fundamental barriers. if you were to try and start this back in the 50s or 40s before we knew what DNA was, before we knew how genes worked. But the thing is everywhere you look, we know what proteins, like where the proteins are. We know how they fold now. We know how cells work. Long story short, no, I don't see any barriers that are saying, oh, nope, there's some magical thing that we don't know. We have all the building blocks. Now we just need the computer power to figure out how it is all put together.
Okay, I was thinking we're coming closer to the end of the podcast. I still think there are people who are curious about you kind of quitting AI and what you're going to do. And also, like, are you optimistic when you look at kind of the next 2 decades? I think I heard some of that, like that you don't need to kind of push people in the right direction anymore, or is it more just a personal wish, more nature, more writing?
Yeah, it's actually both. So to the first point, yes, I decided to quit focusing on AI specifically because I noticed that every bit of effort was kind of almost wasted energy. I inspired a lot of people. I started a conversation. The conversation is going a particular way. I also studied it, like what's happening in terms of economics and geopolitically and everything, to see the pattern, to see the trend that things are going in. And I trust that things are going in the right direction. It's not going to be perfect. Nothing ever is. But the right conversations are being had. More people are involved. And also what I hope happens is that by me stepping back, that other people are going to step into that void that I left, that vacuum, and that they will bring even more to the conversation. They'll bring a freshness to the conversation, which I think is really important. So I can see that territory, and I trust that the rest of humanity will work itself out. I've had people tell me that I still could contribute, and sure, I could. But I look at the problems that are not guaranteed to be solved. So number one is what we've been talking about here is post-labor economics. There's a lot of ways that is a much harder problem to solve, because guess what? Like I said earlier, where investment goes, results follow. All the investment is going into artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence and robotics is inevitable. The economic pull, like the gravitational pull to invest in that and solve those problems, is undeniable. Every nation on the planet, every major corporation, everything is going to go towards artificial intelligence. And I don't mean like 100% of all resources, but what I mean is everyone is paying attention to it, and it will affect everything. That is like, okay, I can surf the wave, but the wave is going without me. However, it is not a foregone conclusion that post-labor economics will be solved. It's not a foregone conclusion that things will go well for everyone, kind of what we've been talking about today. So I think that it would, just in terms of the contribution that I can make to humanity, it would be better for me to put my brain power on how do we navigate this transition? This transition is happening, whether you like it or not. And a lot of people don't like it. And there's so many people that are so cynical that are like, oh, AI is just going to kill everyone. And then they don't think about the problem. It's like, okay, well, what if you're wrong and AI doesn't kill everyone, which is why I stopped talking about AI safety. What if AI doesn't kill everyone? What are the problems that still remain after that? The problems that remain after that are everything from corporate power to governance to how do we negotiate a new social contract if you no longer have labor power? There's so many other more interesting and more pressing problems to solve. And I think that it's just, that's where I can have a greater positive impact. And then, yes, to your other point, I love writing. I'm working on a sequel to my novel, and I love being in the woods, and I want to have a more relaxing life. So, I just got off the treadmill. Why stay on the hamster wheel when AI is going to play out naturally no matter what I do? There's other things that I can do that are more meaningful to me and more meaningful for my contribution to the rest of the world. So that's my reasoning.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. So, well, thank you for this interview, for this podcast. I hope you'll come back. I think there's lots of things to unpack in the space of what you're talking about, post-labor economics, helping people thinking in positive ways about how to form their life after we have AGI, or if we already have it. So, well, it's been a pleasure. Thank you, David.
Thank you. It's been a good talk. Thank you so much.